Hello from the land of masking. My sister-in-law made this for me. I came in from errands today and I thought, wow, I've never done a live read with my mask on, and I work all day with my mask on. So I just thought we should commemorate, the time. So I remember that I really did wear my mask. 2 times in one day I'm reading. I know, shocked. But I have the day off. I've celebrated Veterans Day. I've seen my dad. I've painted where I needed to paint. I've done all my checklist. It's still early and I want to get through the book because I like the book. So let's read. This is chapter 27, page 143. Remember, I encourage you to have a book to read along and to physically hold it, to annotate in it if you're reading along for school, to have your glasses not with water on them. I think they steamed up from my mask. Those of you that wear glasses with a mask, you know the problem. So let's read. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass away. So this has gone on 3 months that Jane has been gone because she left at Christmas time. So we know that Mr. Collins, that was before Christmas too, has been married like 2 or 3 months because we're into January and February. March was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford, remember? She decided she's going to go visit her friend Charlotte Lucas. She had not at first thought very seriously of going thither, but Charlotte, she soon found, was depending on the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. There was novelty in the scheme, and as, with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless. A little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. So remember, Jane is gone. Her mother drives her a little bit crazy. So this is a good excuse to leave. It's a good distraction. The journey would moreover give her a peep at Jane, and in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Everything, however, went on smoothly and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. She was to accompany Sir William and his second daughter. The improvement of spending a night in London was added in time, and the plan became perfect as plan could be. The only pain was in leaving her father, who would certainly miss her, and who, when it came to the point, so little liked her going that he told her to write him and almost promised to answer her letter. Her dad loves her. She's the favorite. We already know that. And he's like, I'm going to miss you. Please make sure you write to me. The farewell, can you imagine a time where you couldn't FaceTime your family? I mean, I grew up at a time where we didn't have these cell phones. And so distance like that, you could send postcards or you could send letters. I moved from Michigan to Louisiana and left a boyfriend my junior year. And we tried to carry on the relationship after I left with letters. And I even went back once to see him. Obviously, it didn't work. It's really impossible to maintain a relationship just writing letters. But that's all we had back then in the ancient days. So imagine even more then. The letters were sent by a horse and buggy. So a very different time. The farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly. Remember, nothing developed between them. On his side, even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired, and his manner of bidding her adieu, saying goodbye, wishing her every enjoyment, and reminding her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide. There was a solicitude, an interest, which she felt must ever attach her to him with a most sincere regard, and she parted from him convinced that whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. I know, Siddharth. Well, you're reading a lot of other books too, Siddharth, so I understand. But aren't you proud of me? I am just like the busy little worker bee today, getting this book read. Because people want to get to Animal Farm, and then I've got Time Machine, and I've got Alchemist and Tale of Two Cities and the book and the book and the book and the book. There's always another one. There's always another one. Her fellow travelers the next day were not of a kind to make her think him less agreeable. Sir William Lucas and his daughter Maria, a good-humored girl, but as empty-headed as himself, had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chaise, the buggy. So he's like, the author is, not he, she, the author is saying that her companions are not interesting. She gets bored by them. Elizabeth loved absurdities, but she had known Sir William's too long. He could tell her nothing new of the wonders of his presentation and knighthood, and his civilities were worn out like his information. It was a journey of only 24 miles, and they began it so early as to be in Gracechurch Street by noon. As they drove to Mr. Gardner's door, so think about that. How many here's a math problem. 24 miles. They left at well, we don't know the time. We have a variable that's missing. We don't know what time they left, but let's say they left at 6. Then they traveled for 6 hours to get 24 miles. How many miles an hour are they traveling? There's your word problem for the day. As they drove to Mr. Gardner's door, Jane was at a drawing room window. And if you're in the future and you answer this problem in the comments below, make sure you explain what you're answering, because 2 years from now, I'm not going to remember that I asked this word problem. Being a person who doesn't like math, but has to admit that math is in every part of all of our education. Jane was at a drawing room window watching their arrival. When they entered the passage, she was there to welcome them, and Elizabeth, looking earnestly in her face, was pleased to see it healthful and lovely as ever. On the stairs were a troop of little boys and girls, whose eagerness for their cousin's appearance would not allow them to wait in the drawing room, and whose shyness, as they had not seen her for a 12-month, prevented their coming lower. All was joy and kindness. The day passed most pleasantly away, the morning in bustle and shopping, and the evening at one of the theaters. Elizabeth then contrived to sit by her aunt. Their first subject was her sister, and she was more grieved than astonished to hear 24 miles in 6 hours, is what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what it looks like in this word problem. Their first subject was her sister, and she was more grieved than astonished to hear, in reply to her minute inquiries, that though Jane always struggled to support her spirits, there were periods of dejection. It was reasonable, however, to hope that they could not continue long. Mrs. Gardner gave her the particulars also of Miss Bingley's visit in Gracechurch Street, and repeated conversations occurring at different times between Jane and herself, which proved that the former had, from her heart, given up the acquaintance. 4 miles an hour is how fast you go in a horse and buggy. You can walk that faster, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to walk 24 miles, but people do it with marathons and things. Sunshine Ollie, hello. Mrs. Gardner, and one of my points of teaching, why stop and look at that other than to make fun of math, is to help us really get the sense of how different the pace of life was. You know, we think a 20-minute trip in the car is just unbearably long. So for them to go into town, they're only 24 miles away, but look at the world of difference between the way their life is and life in London. And you stop, sometimes those not seemingly significant details help us better understand a book that we're reading. Mrs. Gardner then rallied her niece on Wickham's desertion and complimented her on bearing it so well. But my dear Elizabeth, she added, what sort of girl is Miss King? That's the one that had the money. I should be sorry to think our friend a mercenary. Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas, you were afraid of his marrying me because it would be imprudent. And now, because he's trying to get a girl with only 10,000 pounds, you want to find out that he is mercenary. So mercenary, you do something for money. Thank you for the thumbs up, people. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her mistress of this fortune. No, why should he? If it was not allowable for him to gain my affections because I had no money, what occasion could there be for making love to a girl whom he did not care about and who was equally poor? That's good reasoning. But there seems indelicacy in directing his attentions towards her so soon after this event. A man in distressed circumstances has not time for all those elegant decorums which other people may observe. If she does not object to it, why should we? Her not objecting does not justify him. It only shows her being deficient in something else, sense or feeling. Well, cried Elizabeth, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. I should be sorry, to think ill of a young man who has lived so long in Derbyshire. Oh, if that is all, I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I am sick of them all, thank heaven. I'm not going tomorrow where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither manner nor sense to recommend him. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all. Take care, Lizzie. That speech savors strongly of disappointment, like bitterness. Before they were separated by the conclusion of the play, she had the unexpected happiness of an invitation to accompany her uncle and aunt in a tour of pleasure which they proposed taking in the summer. We have not quite determined how far it shall carry us, said Mrs. Gardiner, but perhaps to the lakes. No scheme could have been more agreeable to Elizabeth, and her acceptance of the invitation was most ready and grateful. My dear, dear aunt, she rapturously cried, what delight, what felicity! You give me fresh life and vigor. Adieu to disappointments and spleen. What are men to rocks and mountains? Ah, what hours of transport we shall spend! And when we do return, it shall not be like other travelers, without being able to give one accurate idea of anything. We will know where we have gone. We will recollect what we have seen. Lakes, mountains, and rivers shall not be jumbled together in our imaginations, nor, when we attempt to describe any particular scene, will we begin quarreling about its relative situation. Let our first effusions be less insupportable than those of the generality of travelers. So, should we keep reading chapter 28? Let's see how long it is. Oh, it's not long. And I only have 12 minutes in for this read. So let's see what's going to happen next. So Lizzie is over all the men in her life, and she's excited about this upcoming trip in the summer with her aunt and uncle to the lakes in England, Lake Country. Chapter 28, page 147. Every object of the next day's journey was new and interesting to Elizabeth, and her spirits were in a state for enjoyment, for she had seen her sister looking so well as to banish all fear for her health, and the prospect of her northern tour was a constant source of delight. When they left the high road for the lane to Hunsford, every eye was in search of the parsonage, the house where the Collins live, and every turning expected to bring it in view. The paling of Rosings Park was their boundary on one side. Elizabeth smiled at the recollection of all that she had heard of its inhabitants. At length, the parsonage was discernible. They could see it. The garden sloping to the road, the house standing in it, the green pails and the laurel hedge, everything declared they were arriving. Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the door, and the carriage stopped at the small gate, which led by a short gravel walk to the house, amidst the nods and smiles of the whole party. In a moment, they were all out of the chaise. I don't know how you say that. Chaise in French. Chase. I don't know. Rejoicing at the sight of each other. Mrs. Collins welcomed her friend with the liveliest pleasure. Now, Mrs. Collins is Charlotte Lucas, because she's married now. And Elizabeth was more and more satisfied with coming when she found herself so affectionately received. She saw instantly that her cousin's manners were not altered by his marriage. His formal civility was just what it had been, and he detained her some minutes at the gate to hear and satisfy his inquiries after all her family. They were then, with no other delay than his pointing out the neatness of the entrance, taken into the house, and as soon as they were in the parlor, he welcomed them a second time with ostentatious formality to his humble abode, and punctually repeated all his wife's offers of refreshment. Elizabeth was prepared to see him in his glory, and she could not help fancying that in displaying the good proportion of the room, its aspect, and its furniture, he addressed himself particularly to her, as if wishing to make her feel what she had lost in refusing him. That's awkward. But though everything seemed neat and comfortable, she was not able to gratify him by any sigh of repentance, and rather looked with wonder at her friend that she could have so cheerful an air with such a companion. When Mr. Collins said anything of which his wife might reasonably be ashamed, which certainly was not unseldom, she involuntarily turned her eye on Charlotte. Once or twice she could discern a faint blush, but in general, Charlotte wisely did not hear. After sitting long enough to admire every article of furniture in the room, from the sideboard to the fender, to give an account of their journey and of all that had happened in London, Mr. Collins invited them to take a stroll in the garden, which was large and well laid out, and to the cultivation of which he attended himself. To work in his garden was one of the most respectable pleasures, and Elizabeth admired the command of countenance with which Charlotte talked of the healthfulness of the exercise, and owned she encouraged it as much as possible. So he sits there, NBA Galaxy. I love what you do. Well, NBA Galaxy, do you play basketball at the NBA? I probably love what you do too. I taught a student who plays for the NBA now. But thank you. You love reading? Do you read too? And what books have you been reading? So I was going to describe what that passage was all about. So Collins had asked Elizabeth to marry him. She didn't. And so now he's kind of history books. I was a history teacher too. I love history books. So he is like, kind of, you turn me down. Look at everything you lost. And he wants her to be like, oh, wow, I gave up all of this. It's not really about love. It's, you could have had this and you didn't get it. But she doesn't feel like that. She doesn't feel like being married to him, his personality, would have been worth this home. And she keeps checking Charlotte to see if Charlotte's embarrassed or if she's truly happy. She can't imagine that Charlotte is happy with her. And so they're both justifying each of their decisions in that passage. So, yeah, I love history too. I love biographies about people from history. From his garden, Mr. Collins would have led them around his 2 meadows, but the ladies, not having shoes to encounter the remains of a white frost, turned back, and while Sir William accompanied him, Charlotte took her sister and friend over the house, extremely well pleased, probably, to have the opportunity of showing it without her husband's help. It was rather small, but well built and convenient, and everything was fitted up and arranged with neatness and consistency, of which Elizabeth gave Charlotte all the credit. Oh, I need to thank NBA Galaxy if you're still there. If you like history, you ought to read on my channel, Cry the Beloved Country, or any of my Ernest Gaines books, like A Gathering of Old Men or A Lesson Before Dying. That's Southern American history. Great Gatsby would be Northeast. Oh, my mind just went blank. The American Dream concept, the Roaring Twenties, good historical settings. They're not truly historical fiction, but you have to have a good grasp of history to really understand the books. So if you like African history, Things Fall Apart, beautiful story, challenging story. Purple Hibiscus is also North Africa, Northwest Africa, not really Maghreb, but North Africa. So depending on what part of history, a lot of my books on my playlist do have a historical leaning to them. So try and check them out and let me know what books you've read along with me. She had already learnt that Lady Catherine was still in the country. It was spoken of again while they were at dinner, when Mr. Collins, joining in, observed, "Yes, Miss Elizabeth, you will have the honour of seeing Lady Catherine de Bourgh on the ensuing Sunday at church, and I need not say you will be delighted with her. She is all affability and condescension, and I doubt not but you will be honoured with some portion of her notice when service is over. I have scarcely any hesitation in saying that she will include you and my sister Maria in every invitation with which she honours us during your stay here. Her behaviour to my dear Charlotte is charming. We dine at Rosings twice every week and are never allowed to walk home. Her ladyship's carriage is regularly ordered for us. I should say one of her ladyship's carriages, for she has several. Lady Catherine is a very respectable, sensible woman indeed," added Charlotte, "and a most attentive neighbor." Very true, my dear. That is exactly what I say. She's the sort of woman whom one cannot regard with too much deference. Elite Jessie, I read A Thousand Splendid Suns, loved it. To this day, no book tips that book. I love that book. It's really rapidly become one of my dear, dear favorites, but I've just got so many books that I love. Books from my childhood that I love. Books that I've taught that I love. Books that I've read on my own. I mean, it's tough But you're right, Elite Jesse. It is really a fabulous book. And I've taught it for 4 consecutive years, and it really held up. I never got tired of rereading it. So that to me is a real measure of a great book. And I'm really enjoying reading Pride and Prejudice again, although I haven't read this in decades. I mean, I read it as a girl. So the evening was spent chiefly in talking over Hertfordshire news and telling again what had been already written, and when it closed, Elizabeth, in the solitude of her chamber, had to meditate upon Charlotte's degree of contentment, to understand her address and guiding and composure and bearing with her husband, and to acknowledge that it was all done very well. She had also to anticipate how her visit would pass, the quiet tenor of her usual employments, the vexatious interruptions of Mr. Collins, and the gaieties of their intercourse with Rosings. A lively imagination soon settled it all. Terry O'Malley, my students are reading 1,000 Splendid Suns. Oh, Terry, a teacher. I love that you're doing that. I think about a lot, you know, how I could use this tool as a classroom teacher. Sadly, I stopped teaching in December, and I work for my state's Department of Education. So if, the virtual world, I'm very well aware of it with working at the state. But Terry, if there's any way I can be of support, a shout out to your kids, a personalized message to them, anything like a virtual quiz, something like that, I would be very happy to conduct a quiz that they would have to do some writing prompts to. Any way I can help a fellow teacher, I'm so happy to do that, because I can't imagine how hard it's been to adapt to this virtual learning experience. And like I said, the work that I do now for the Department of Education, I'm trying to support our districts and helping our teachers get through this time too. So I really appreciate you using my tools in your classroom. It makes me really happy to know I'm helping students. Elite Jesse, they're going to love it. They're going to love what? Pride and Prejudice? Elite Jesse, I lost track of what we're saying. Oh, wow. Terry, I so respect and admire you. So I worked in special ed, so I worked with a lot of language interruptions. So I can imagine what a challenge. I mean, is thought and language heavy as teaching, how responsive you have to be. You know, God bless you. What an amazing woman. I love teachers. We're really a special breed. So I mean it. I have an Instagram. You can DM me there. It's Best Tutor Friend. Or we have a group called Discord if you want to work with that. Or Terry, do you know about Flipgrid? It's a really great tool for getting thoughts that aren't written. And it's very much like a Snapchat. So I find that kids really respond really well. So you can make the prompt and they've got 30 seconds to respond, and then they have to respond to each other. It's called Flipgrid. And I'm pretty sure it's a free platform that you can access. Oh, Jesse, Elite Jesse, that's really nice of you. I think I see where you are. Yeah, they are going to love it. I think all the students that went through 1,000 Splendid Suns when I taught it really connected with it and liked it, even though it's very different than our culture, but the characters are so rich. So I think it's Elite Jesse, thanks for that support. That's sweet of you. I appreciate it. So back to Pride and Prejudice. We're almost done with this chapter. I'm very sincere, Terry O'Malley. Reach out to me on Best Tutor Friend Instagram if you have an Instagram. If not, I know on my YouTube that my Gmail address is here and you can reach me there. If you want any kind of help at all, I'm more than happy to guide you through some of the prompts that I did for class, or, ideas that I have, anything like that. What state are you in? If you're in Louisiana, how fun would that be? So let's see where we were. About the middle of the next day. Yeah. About the middle of the next day, as she was in her room getting ready for a walk, a sudden noise below seemed to speak the whole house in confusion. And after listening a moment, she heard somebody running upstairs in a violent hurry and calling loudly after her. She opened the door and met Maria in the landing place, who, breathless with agitation, cried out, "Oh, my dear Eliza, pray make haste and come into the dining room, for there is such a sight to be seen. I will not tell you what it is. Make haste and come down this moment." Like, hurry up. Georgia. I was just in Georgia at the beginning of this month. So I've got friends there. I can have an excuse to come back to Atlanta. I don't know if that's where you are, but it's not that far. So what do you think's going on? Elizabeth asked questions in vain. Maria would tell her nothing more, and down they ran into the dining room, which fronted the lane in quest of this wonder. It was two ladies stopping in a low phaeton. I think that's an open buggy at the garden gate. And is this all? Cried Elizabeth. I expected at least that the pigs were got into the garden, and here is nothing but Lady Catherine and her daughter. La, my dear, said Maria, quite shocked at the mistake. It is not Lady Catherine. The old lady is Mrs. Jenkinson, who lives with them. The other is Miss de Bourgh. Only look at her. She is quite a little creature. Who would have thought she could be so thin and small? She is abominably rude to keep Charlotte out of doors in all this wind. Why does she not come in? Oh, Charlotte says she hardly ever does. It is the greatest of favors when Miss de Bourgh comes in. I like her appearance, said Elizabeth, struck with other ideas. She looks sickly and cross. Yes, she will do for him very well. She will make him a very proper wife. She's thinking in terms of this girl is what Bingley deserves. He could have had her beautiful sister, but he's passing over her beautiful sister for this wealthy young girl. Mr. Collins and Charlotte were both standing at the gate in conversation with the ladies, and Sir William, till Elizabeth's high diversion, was stationed in the doorway, in earnest contemplation of the greatness before him, and constantly bowing whenever Miss de Bourgh looked that way. Like he's very patronizing. Oh, yes, ma'am, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so honored. He's just overdoing it. At length, there was nothing more to be said. The ladies drove on, and the others returned into the house. Mr. Collins no sooner saw the two girls than he began to congratulate them on their good fortune, which Charlotte explained by letting them know that the whole party was asked to dine at Rosings the next day. So now we're meeting new characters, and we're getting more and more of the plot complicating. And you learn that in school when you look at those plot maps in 5th and 6th grade. So you have the opening action, you have the rise, you open the characters, and you build to the conflict. You know what the conflict is, and that conflict keeps building and keeps building. The plot and you might have parallel plots going on at a time, and then you're going to have the big turning point, and then all the falling action. So we're still in that rising phase of all the action, and we're adding a lot more complexity into everything. So what do you think the conflict is? And when we talk about like man versus society, man versus technology, what do you think the plot, what do you think the conflict is? We're far enough into it to have figured it out. So if you know, put that in our comments below and tell me, do you think you have parallel plots going on? And if so, what are the parallel plots? What are you seeing in characterization? What are you seeing happening in the story? Do you see any foreshadowing that's happening? Look for all those things as you read, and make sure you annotate as you go along so you're prepared for the quizzes and for the essays. So, Terry, if you're still there, I wish you all the best. I'm assuming you're a high school teacher. We are a special breed, and I'm so honored to have you using my tool to help your class learn. And for Elite Jessie, thank you for your enthusiasm. All of you guys that come on and read with me, it means the world to me. Don't forget to subscribe, just because I like to see us grow. And if you ring the bell, then you know when I come on randomly. Teach 12th grade in Atlanta. Great. I was in, I forget. She lives 10 minutes from the airport it was a really cute little community. I'm not going to remember the name of it now. But we were right on the Beltline, I think y'all call it. We walked along there. That was so nice with Corona going on that we could have our masks and be outside. I really enjoyed that. So, Godspeed to you. And 12th grade is such an important age. When I taught A Thousand Splendid Suns, we did it as our 12th grade. It was world literature for us. So it was really well received. And I think 12th graders are able to accept the Greenbelt. Is that what it's called? I don't know what I called it, but yeah, I loved it there. We had a really good time in Atlanta. Was college friends at college reunion that I went back for. Not college reunion, but college sorority sisters. There were only a couple of us because of Corona, but I took the risk and wanted to see. I just needed to get out. Maybe that was selfish. I don't know. So ring the bell, because you never know. Like today, Siddharth said, what am I doing twice in one day? It's just, I get crazy like that. I really enjoy reading, and I do miss my classroom so much. So Terry, it means a lot to me. Fifth year teaching. Oh, I've done it 4. I would love to exchange ideas because I always get more out of the ending every time. And I've had some questions. Have you read much of Khaled Hosseini's? Because there are some parallels between characters in And the Mountains Echoed and even Kite Runner. And so I've often wondered if those are woven, like they're minor characters. And I'm not great on detail. But so if somebody that is really a good reader would catch that detail, I'd love to have that discussion. Yeah, it's a good story. But I cry all the way through that. It's on my channel too. Um, Terry, you might look at Discord, and I will put it in. It's in past reads that I've done, on the comments, but I'll put it in the comments below the Discord link, because there's a lot of high school students in there that come on and we chat. We talk about college prep resources. We talk about books. We have speed reads, and that might be something your kids could use. You set times up with buddies to say, we're reading now for 20 or 30 minutes, whatever it is. And it's just kind of like a sprint, a reading sprint, they call it. And that was a new idea to me. You may already know about it. I think it's great. And I'm curious to know, are you using quote journals or annotations? That helped me as a teacher so much. I would put a prompt up for the week, knowing what chapters were coming up. And I would say, as you read, find 5 quotes that support this prompt. And then at the end of maybe 3 weeks, those would be what I used to weave into the essay. And so they already had, on their quote journal, they would have the quote that supported the prompt and then a short support of the quote. So that just built in how to incorporate their quotes into their essays, and it scaffolded it for them. Now, remember, I taught kids in special ed, but it made grading for me super easy because I'm just looking for the quotes and the supports. And then I know what they already write, so that when they get into their prompt, it all just flowed really well. Another teacher shared that idea with me. It made grading for papers so much easier. So do you use Google Classroom? Because you could just put it in Google Classroom, the prompt, and then tell them however many quotes you want them to collect. And then I would make a template. So here's the quote and here's the response. And then I could just grade it super quickly. The quote was there and their logical support made sense. And then it easily morphed into a paper toward the end. Or you could even use it for your essay for the final exam. And they had a whole series of quotes that they could bring to the essay if it was already in their document to begin with. It was a really helpful tip. One of the best tools I added into my teaching curriculum toward the end, because, reading all that is really hard, and keeping up with all of the quotes and grading, and it's just so difficult. AP. I mean, it even works for the teacher that gave me the tip was an AP teacher. So it works for all. So see if it helps. Let me know. I'd love to hear back from you. All right. It is almost 6 o'clock here. You can see the sun is down, and my sweet little neighbors have twinkle lights up. I love twinkle lights. I need to add some twinkle lights because they always make the world happy. When I lived in Sweden, everybody had twinkle lights. Frizzly. Wow, you're in 9th grade. Yay, 9th grade is an important time. But we're reading Pride and Prejudice. Are you in 9th grade? Terry, good night to you. Have a great evening and take care of your health, because that's the most important thing. We need good teachers, so thank you for all you do. All right, so as I was saying, ring the bell, send me comments, check me out on Instagram or Discord. I'm going to drop that link below. And Their Eyes Were Watching God. That's such a good one. One of my favorites too. Y'all are all here reading books that I really like on my playlist. My most watched series is The Crucible, which always shocks me. And I think the second is Their Eyes Were Watching God. So check out In Community. I always ask a question. Right now there's a see who can come get the right answer of what is the country that has my most continuous watched minutes on average. And I give you 4 choices. So what country do you think around the world watches my videos the most? Interesting. We always have some question to ask. Engage us. All right. Y'all have a great evening. I hope if you're at home, you are safe and you're doing well in school. And if you're back to school, you're safe and you're being a supportive community member. And we had a teacher on tonight. You see how hard they work. Thank your teachers for what they do and recognize that they're human and some of them are going through stuff and maybe they're not the best year they've ever taught, or maybe it is their best year they've ever taught. But teachers, I hope one thing you get out of this is we're human beings. So be kind to your teachers, respect your teachers, they'll respect you in return. And if they don't, talk to somebody about it, not just a friend. Go to an administrator that you appreciate and say, this is not working. This teacher is not being respectful. We're not having equitable access to education, and and deal with it. Advocate for yourself. It's important. We're in a time of social change, and people are being more and more aware that not everybody is doing what they should. But most teachers that I taught with really cared about what they were doing. So you know, go to them first if you have a problem with them and try and talk respectfully about what you're having the problem with. All right, well, I'm well over time. You guys keep reading, and I will read to you next time. See ya.